Settle down, brother. This is the Quarter Report powered by ENCA.com. South Africa is a movie. Welcome to the watch party. The majority of surveyed dollar millionaires from a representative survey say that they are happy, willing, and supportive of a 2% wealth tax in order to provide more funds for the government to provide key social services, to help fight the cost of living crisis, and to have just policies that help all people in society. That's the main headline from a really fascinating survey that's just come out from Patriotic Millionaires and Oxfam South Africa. You have heard us talk about wealth taxes before. You know where our show stands on wealth tax. We believe that it is an obvious and essential thing to do. Did you know, for example, that the average billionaire around the world pays just 0.3% of their total income and earnings back to the state? Some other things in this that I find jaw-dropping are that the majority of dollar billionaires in South Africa believe that money going to, like wealth accruing overwhelmingly with a small group of people, is a threat to democracy, that it undermines faith in the justice system, that it leads to a decline in the trust of the media. Super fascinating. And we're going to talk about, in particular, Oxfam South Africa's perspective on how Oxfam South Africa believes wealth should be taxed to 2% at least in South Africa as part of their G20 Summit 2025 program. This show, this conversation is brought to you by Oxfam South Africa. If you're unfamiliar with Oxfam South Africa's work, they're a social justice organization working at the intersection of poverty and inequality. They work on a lot of things, but one of the things that they work on and are advocating for this year is an effective wealth tax on the richest people in South Africa and the world, and at the G20, trying to get commitments from different states, different governments, different leaders of different countries, that they will go back to their countries and they will institute wealth taxes as policy. So we're going to talk about Oxfam South Africa's potential solutions on something that you know that we already feel should happen, and we're going to talk about some of the dangers or the potential obstacles or the potential arguments back against their position. The only place that you can watch the whole show, as you know, is on ENCA.com. The link is in the description. If you're watching on YouTube, join our WhatsApp channel. Give us a like and a subscribe, and also go on to www.3beaniesnetwork.com to get some Settle Down Brother merchandise. Let's talk about this fascinating survey. So we've talked about how it's so obvious that you should be taxing billionaires and dollar millionaires for a very, very long time, or even just taxing them as much as the rest of us get taxed. Again, you shouldn't, when you're thinking about taxation, look at the number of rands and cents that people get taxed, because everyone gets taxed a percentage of their earnings. That's fairness and justice and equality. But very often the hyper wealthy have influence and lobbying power over government and political parties and the media, and so they can push for lower taxation on themselves. And that's how you get that finding that like the average billionaire only gets taxed 0.3% of their total wealth every year compared to everybody else. Actually, in Oxfam's briefing, Oxfam pointed out billionaires effectively pay the equivalent around 0.3% of their wealth in real taxes. Just as an example, a female or woman trader in Uganda pays about 40% of her small income in taxes. And then there's the other thing, that every single person who's accrued any kind of wealth in any place in the world has accrued that wealth not only by their own talent or blessings or good fortune, but by the key good fortune of growing up in a society ruled by a government with dynamics of inequality and often worker disempowerment, which has allowed them to extract enormous wealth for themselves. So you've got to get rid of this idea that the billionaires and the millionaires just deserve to be so much more wealthy than the rest of us. No, not at all. In fact, they are consequences of dynamics and an ecosystem and a playing field that have benefited them enormously, while in turn mostly disadvantaging most other people. And so you need to understand that just like everyone else gets taxed, you need to contribute back to it to make a more fair ecosystem, a more fair playing field, and so that all people can experience good lives. Basically justice and fairness, right? But then let's look at this Patriotic Millionaires survey. It is absolutely fascinating. Most people instinctively believe that billionaires and millionaires don't want to be taxed and will fight everything tooth and nail to not be taxed. We've spoken before about how silly we think the big arguments are, like, oh, if you try to tax the millionaires and the billionaires, they'll just leave. No evidence that happens around the world. people, especially once they've got extreme wealth, want to live the lives that are exactly that they want and feel like they deserve it. So if they want to live in England or they want to live in Cape Town or whatever, they'll just live there. If you tax them a little bit more, they've still got billions or tens, hundreds of millions of rands to enjoy their perfect lives. Like for many of these billionaires and millionaires, they were never going to invest that money back into the economy or build more factories or create more jobs or whatever. They're just hoarding and accruing this wealth. And if they get taxed, just 2%, by the way, I would love to be taxed just 2% compared to what I get taxed, then the quality of their life meaningfully will not change at all. It'll be not noticeable whatsoever. It will not put them under threat. And then there's also the point, which is very obvious again, that many people's assets are not movable. If you've got a stunning estate in Constantia, you can't flee to the Cayman Islands and take your stunning estate with you. You also can't take all your family, uproot your entire quality of life, sense of belonging, and home. So there's just no real good evidence to suggest this dramatic wealth flight. So those are the key big arguments that I just think have got no real rooting or grounding or validity within them. But now let's look at this Patriotic Millionaires and Oxfam SA findings. So it's really interesting. They interviewed hundreds and hundreds of South African wealthy people. So Farrell Haffajee reporting today also made the point that a dollar millionaire is someone with an investable income of more than $1 million, which is 17.14 million rand. And the Africa Wealth Report for this year says that there are about 41,100 South Africans with that kind of income or that kind of wealth and more than that. And again, what we've been sold is these are hyper-capitalists who don't want to contribute back and don't want to give. But the majority of people in this Patriotic Millionaires survey, and not even a close majority, like if this was the South African political system, mid-60s%, they could change the constitution. They have said that they would be willing and supportive of paying a wealth tax of 2%, which again is very little for them. For people with this much money, it's not an extraordinary sum of money at all. 64% that they are strongly or somewhat in favor of an increased tax on the very wealthy individuals to reduce inequality, fund improved public services, and deal with the cost of living crisis. Something else that is like another point that has been made is that South African millionaires, actually more than most countries, do give back and do fund charitable causes in that. So I'm not trying to tell you that our millionaires and billionaires are great people and haven't done evil things, but there is an indication that they're willing to give back and happy to do so. Then the next thing, 62% of respondents said, to what extent, if at all, would you support an ongoing international action to set standards for how we tax the super rich? 62% said that they would support it. And then they said, to what extent would you support or oppose a 2% wealth tax if it would pay for the services like social protection, education, the energy transition, to raise billions of rands annually to do that? And 70%, 7 out of 10 of these hyper wealthy people said they strongly or somewhat supported it, which is extraordinary. But then I just want to reiterate the self-reflective part, because these are hyper wealthy people who overwhelmingly in this survey, in the responses, said that the influence of people with extreme wealth is bad for countries. So again, 73% of respondents said that they agreed that the influence of those with extreme wealth is leading to a decline in the trust of the justice system. We've seen this in South Africa. Hyper-wealthy don't go to jail, never seem to go to jail. There's never orange overalls if you're wealthy or politically connected enough. 70% of respondents said the influence of those with extreme wealth is leading to a decline in trust of the media. You can also understand that. Big media being bought by powerful people, whether it be Twitter as a social media or the Washington Post with Jeff Bezos, or wherever you go around the world, hyper wealthy people controlling narratives and trying to twist our thinking about all kinds of things, including taxing the wealthy. It's leading to a distrust of the media. And then 70% of these respondents also said the influence of those with extreme wealth is leading to a decline in trust in democracy. And again, you can understand why. People aren't really distrusting the democratic process. What they're distrusting is that the democratic process can work well, considering it seems like in many countries around the world, if you're wealthy enough, you can subvert and undermine the democratic process, and then you need strong laws to counteract the influence of the hyper-wealthy. All of these absolutely fascinating findings. And now let's talk about Oxfam SA's proposed solution. So the solution is to tax the super rich, this is in their words, for people and planet. They said we can raise trillions every single year. A tiny wealth tax of up to 5% on the world's multimillionaires and billionaires could generate approximately $1.7 trillion per year, which is enough to fund universal quality public services everywhere, to finance climate prevention and adaptation, and reduce inequality, end poverty, and strengthen social protection. The super rich won't even notice. If the 16 wealthiest people lost 99% of their fortune overnight, they'd still be billionaires. Which again goes back to literally everything that we've been saying. And then Oxfam SA goes on to say, extreme wealth buys political power. Taxing the super rich helps break oligarchic control and defend democratic institutions. And in terms of public support, it's a no-brainer. Polls show overwhelming public support for taxing the super rich. Economists agree. Even some millionaires are calling for higher taxes on themselves. And the people demand it. The world is watching. This is about whether governments will stand up to billionaire greed or let democracy and global cooperation collapse. So let's respond to all of this as us. The first thing I want to say is that it's a little weird talking about this, considering our president is probably, I think, a South African rands billionaire or multi-millionaire. It's a little weird with that dynamic. He's also the brother-in-law of one of the wealthiest people on the continent, Patrice Motsepe. But that's part of like a long-running trend all around the world, right? Is like hyper-wealthy people, whether it be Trump or whoever else, co-opting and getting to big positions of power. It is a little weird. I also just think that this is a no-brainer. And again, you can go and watch all of our shows about this. I think it's a no-brainer. I'm really fascinated that the survey indicates that there are all of these millionaires, hundreds and hundreds in this representative survey, saying that they are the problem, or people like them with more wealth are the problem. It's what we've been saying for the longest time. I understand that there could be some political will now, but there needs to be some extra kind of, I don't know if it's a mass mobilization push or something like that, to force this through. Because too often the hyper wealthy ultimately are at the meetings. They've bought the tables at the ANC events. They're sitting at Ramaphosa's table. They're influencing, lobbying. They're funding all the political parties so that if any of them wins or does well, they'll advocate for them. And some of them will say, no, we don't want our bottom line touched.
The thing that makes sense for me why dollar millionaires are supportive of this now is that I think across the world we are reaching quite a crisis point. If we zoom out a little bit, we've still effectively recovering from 2008 financial crisis.
COVID.
Those are the two big economic crises of the last few decades, which is what I feel a lot of people are feeling now, is the sense that the ties that bind us as societies are falling apart, and we start pushing more towards conspiracy theories and xenophobia and all these very divisive even authoritarianism we're seeing across the world, whether it be Italy or America or Brazil and until recently. It makes sense to me that dollar billionaires are like, okay, cool, we're clearly heading towards an extreme that could be extremely bad for the society as a whole. So we understand as dollar millionaires that we need to somehow arrest this direction.
Because dollar millionaires want a good media, and they want a good justice system, and they want a functioning democracy. Like, they want that in their countries, right? They want to feel safe and secure. They want to feel like their countries are not mired in terrible stories of corruption and extreme poverty and all of that. Like there are actually not that many people in the world who have enough money to completely divorce themselves from the countries, the societies in which they have from which they've come from. Although the more money you have, the more you can choose to just opt out of everyday life. But I think at core, people would still prefer to live in safe, beautiful, functional societies where people are well and people are happy and have opportunities, right? And also, there are 41,000 around about dollar millionaires in South Africa. That's a lot of people. But there's a huge gap between having 17 million rand investable income and 100 million and 1 billion and 2 billion and 3 billion and more than that. And at different levels, I think people want to live normal lives and be a part of society. So maybe that's not that surprising. So the thing that people love to then say back in South Africa is, but what's the point? Corruption. And I hear you. We are watching the corruption crisis of a generation unfold. We are seeing the compromise of the state. We are seeing the amounts of money being stolen from hospitals. I get it. Although I love to remind people that we're actually deeply average around the world for corruption. We're like in the middle of like the World Corruption Index of how corrupt a country can get. So it is very bad, it's not world's worst, unlike our employment rates. But so we are watching all of that. But the solution to that is to fight against and get rid of corruption. It's not to just go, we're not going to do public services anymore. Because no matter how much corruption there is, and it's horrific in the cases of, say, Tembisa Hospital, if we take healthcare as an example, there are so many clinics around South Africa who are functioning well enough that honestly should be functioning way better and are suffering horrific crises of lack of funding and support and money and resources to doctors and nurses and the rest. But it's better that they exist than that they don't, because the private sector has not solved to provide healthcare for the vast majority of South Africans. And so if you didn't have it, people just wouldn't have healthcare. Similar with education, similar with service delivery of various kinds and infrastructure projects and the rest. So the solution is to fight back and deal with corruption. It's not just to stop paying tax and therefore have no government that does anything for anybody, and therefore only the hyper wealthiest people will get what they want, and the rest of the country will be completely abandoned and not helped at all in any way, from a streetlight to a pothole to a clinic.
And we need to invest in the watches. We need to invest in SARS. We need to invest in the SIU. We need to invest in the MPA. The problem with the MPA is that it has been underfunded and they do not have the manpower to do stuff. That is what Shamila Butoi was saying yesterday at the ad hoc committee.
Mm-hmm.
And we have spent, as a country, decades talking about investor confidence and talking about businesses wanting to leave, and there are myriad publications that basically ply their trade on talking about another company that's abandoned or left South Africa and all this kind of stuff.
And yet
we're still here.
But also, as you were telling me, like, investors and big companies are saying, no, South Africa's investable now. There's a good public sentiment.
Totally. And what happened last night is that a couple of reports came up this morning from a speech that was given in Stellenbosch by a guy called Adi Enthoven. He is a high up at Hollard Insurance and also part of an investment group that has invested in Nando's. And so he's a pretty good gauge of what the business community is feeling about South Africa. And he made a speech saying that South Africa turned a corner, and what we are seeing with public-private partnerships around Transnet and load shedding and investor confidence, which is such an irritating phrase, that those people are prioritized over citizens. But investor confidence is up. So if we're looking at it as a country, as a sentiment of the country, AfriForum and Solidariteit may think that we're going to hell in a handbasket. However, the people who would have the most incentive to decry the state, aka the dollar millionaires and the big investment people, seem to be under the impression, and Johan Rupert, that
they're making money, can make money,
that there is an economic and financial stability in South Africa that means that it is investable. And I think that is a really positive sign. I mean, I personally feel as a country we were like on a nosedive, and we have sort of plateaued. It's not in a good state, but we are at least giving ourselves the opportunity to start pulling back up.